call came out at 9:35 last evening. The call was at 33306 17th Lane South in Federal Way, which is a quality apartment complex. The call initially came out as suspicious circumstances, and there was a subject outside was shooting a gun. Our supervisor who was responding actually made an inquiry to our dispatch center asking if we were receiving any other types of calls similar to that. And at the same time that call was made, was advised that yes, there are multiple calls that are coming from this suspicious circumstances. The call receivers could also hear shots being fired as the citizens are calling through the 911 system. Our officers arrive in the complex and confront an individual, a subject, in the stairwell of one of the buildings in this complex. This subject had a long gun, described as a long gun, at the time the officers confronted them. There were verbal commands that were given by the officers to that subject. The subject was not complying with the verbal commands, and given the fact that he was armed, the officers fired on the subject. Following that exchange of gunfire, and I shouldn't say exchange, but the fire by the officers, and we're not sure whether that subject fired or not, the shotgun was dropped, and then the subject left on foot and went some distance from where the officers were. The subject was out of view of the officers at that point. The officers equipped themselves to pursue this suspect. They teamed in a tactical formation to attempt to locate this suspect, and they confronted him in the parking lot of the complex. At that same time, the officers observed two other subjects that were laying in the parking lot and appeared to be the victim of violence. The officers gave verbal commands to the subject, one of those subjects that was laying on the ground and was also moving, and they observed that that was the same suspect that they confronted in the stairwell of the apartment complex. The officers gave verbal commands to this subject, and again, this subject failed to comply with their commands. There was a semi-automatic handgun that was adjacent to this subject on the ground, and contrary to the officers' commands, this subject reached for that handgun. At that point, officers fired several rounds, multiple rounds at that subject again at that time. The officers continued to check on the other individuals in the parking lot and determined that they were victims of gunshot wounds. A systematic search at this point continued for several hours by not only these officers, but a host of our law enforcement partners to help with this response. It involved a door-to-door search of the complex, not knowing if we had other persons responsible for this violence as well. This search took several hours to conduct. So moving on to where we are today, what we know as of today, and I want to highlight that this investigation is ongoing. My comments to you are preliminary, and that we have a great deal of work to do, both in terms of the investigative work that needs to be done, but also the crime scene processing that needs to be done. And this is what we know today. The subject the suspect that was shot by Federal Way police officers is responsible for the death of the other 4 individuals. The suspect is a black male. He's born in 1985, and he lives in this apartment complex. One victim that we located inside an apartment several hours after this initial investigation or initial response. This victim is a white female. She's born in 1988, and she lives in the same apartment as the suspect. And at this time, we believe this is a domestic violence homicide. Again, preliminarily, after this homicide occurred, the suspect proceeded to the parking lot and was confronted by 2 other subjects. The nature of that contact is still under investigation, and we do not have a relationship between this suspect and these individuals at this time. These 2 victims, one is a Hispanic male born in 1989, and he lives in Federal Way. The second victim is a white male born in 1966 who lives in Federal Way. We believe that the suspect shot and killed both of these individuals in the parking lot. The suspect then returned to the apartment complex. At some point, the suspect obtained a shotgun. 2 neighbors who live in the complex heard the shots and went outside of their apartment to inquire. One of the subjects told the other one to call 911, which he did. So that citizen was on the phone and calling 911 to our call receiver. The individual who told him to call 911 went back to his apartment, and we found that citizen dead in his apartment. There was a shotgun round to the front door of the residence, and this citizen was the victim of a shotgun round, which resulted in his passing. This victim is a white male born in 1951, and he lives in this particular apartment where he was found. The suspect, shortly after, and again from the chronology or the sequence of events, shortly after that confrontation with that neighbor, the suspect exited that apartment, went into the stairwell, and then was confronted by responding police officers.